Hi everyone, James from The Wisdom of Deliverymen. I'd like to go ahead and talk again today about the founding of the United States, specifically how the country that we have now is very different and bears little resemblance to the country that was envisioned by our founding fathers. Sure, there's some things that are in line with what the founding fathers expected, but in the three main areas, the three most important areas, I would say, for government, and that will be very important issues in the upcoming presidential election, the United States now looks very different than when it was founded. What are those three areas? Those three areas are foreign policy, those areas are the way that voting in government is conducted, and then finally the composition of American society. Let's start with foreign policy. When the next president of the United States is elected, he or she will essentially be a diplomat 65 or 70% of the time, managing a broad, multifaceted empire with bases in over 100 countries. This is not what the founding fathers wanted or expected for the United States. When the United States was founded and won its independence from Great Britain after a long war that the United States should not have won, yet somehow miraculously did win, the founding fathers quickly realized how weak the United States was. Early on in the Republic, the United States had very little ability to tax its own population. It had very little ability to raise troops, to demand that troops be raised from the states. It had no navy whatsoever, and it had no diplomatic or foreign policy infrastructure other than a very limited series of missions that had been sent to Russia and France, Prussia, and some other countries in Europe. The founding fathers were keenly aware of this, and when they drafted the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, as well as the initial formatting of the government, it was done in a way to keep the United States a highly isolationist power. The United States did not maintain a number of the cabinet positions that existed in European countries, specifically in order to keep the United States an isolationist power. The United States also maintained relatively low taxes and a low tax structure, avoiding a national value-added tax or VAT tax, avoiding levy taxes, banning the ability of the government to quarter troops, and in the context of the time, that also meant not just quartering troops, but requisitioning supplies. All this was done to keep the United States very, very small and have a weak diplomatic and military establishment that would prevent it from expanding or being an interventionist power. When the first president, George Washington, left office, he warned the United States of entangling alliances. But this wasn't just Washington. There was a broad faction of the founding fathers and early government officials that did not want the United States to be involved in any conflicts outside of the United States. It wasn't seen as an American thing. It wasn't seen as a practical thing. One of the ways that the founding fathers made sure that this would happen is they passed legislation and then formatted the government in a way that major treaties and major interventions had to be approved by Congress. Now, other countries at the time didn't do that, and in the future, other countries would find more ways that the executive, the supreme, elected leader of that country, could engage in diplomatic relations unilaterally without the approval of Congress. But the United States, the founders really did not want the United States to be involved in these kinds of things. They wanted the United States to be an isolationist power. So all treaties had to be approved by Congress. Military interventions had to be approved by Congress. Now, advanced several hundred years, and the United States is now the preeminent interventionist power. We have a global empire in over 100 countries, and more than that, we have a very invasive, very developed foreign policy designed to expand our ideology, to export our goods, and to export our ideas to all corners of the world. The second way that the United States is fundamentally different now than when it was founded is in the terms of the structure of government. And I don't just mean how the government is formed and who is elected into it, but what I really mean is who participates in the government, who participates in the elections process, and who participates in government. Today there is this intense drive to have voter participation, civic participation by everybody. It's trained in classes, it's taught in schools, it's taught in the public space, advertising campaigns. The idea now is we want to have an engaged citizen, a citizen that is participating in the aspects of government and the aspects of being a good citizen. Now, these concepts would be completely foreign to the men that founded our country. By and large, the vast majority of the founding fathers were Federalists, and the quintessential idea of the Federalists was that government should be a process that is run and organized by a consensus of reasonable men. And that is an exact quote of Alexander Hamilton, but it was echoed very widely by the early Americans, because the sense of Alexander Hamilton and John Adams and Thomas Pickering and all of the founding fathers, almost all the founding fathers, was that if you turned political power over to the general public, over to traditionally disenfranchised groups, over to even the unlanded freemen and kind of common workers, the common citizen, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, that you would have essentially mob rule. It was very much believed that if you turned power over to the people, that the people would make rash decisions, that they would fall for the more emotional and theatrical political candidates and political ideas, and that more than anything, that they would make bad decisions. So the way that the United States was structured was indeed to ensure freedom. It was also designed to ensure that a consensus of reasonable men always ruled, and that the ability of the common people to actually affect politics was extremely limited. Now, how did they do that? The first way they did that was with the Senate. Senators were originally appointed by governors, which meant that they were going to be highly connected leaders that could be vetted. And only later was the election of the U.S. Senate changed to a direct popular vote. Another way that they did that was with the House of Representatives. They proportioned a large number of representative districts proportional to population. And the reason for this was they wanted to basically split and divest out the power of these large voter blocks amongst numerous representatives. So in a sense, you're controlling the average American voter because there's so many different representatives, none of which has sufficient power. They have enough power to participate, but not too much power to actually change anything. And that's actually a very common feeling even today if you talk to representatives in the U.S. House, that they have a lot of power, but not enough to actually change anything. Another way that they did it was with the Electoral College itself. The Electoral College was a way of ensuring that you had reasonable men electing the president, and that those reasonable men did not deviate and elect some kind of radical candidate as the people might. Advance, 250 years to today, and what do we have? We have a massive enfranchisement of the popular citizen. Maybe not directly through the political process, but through the economic process, right? The power of the consumer is paramount in the American system, through the media, and then most of all through now we have the internet mob. Recently, the only way that policies are being passed, anything is getting done at either the state level or especially the national level, is if it has the backing of a large internet mob, an outraged internet mob, essentially villagers with torches. So that's been another shift. Now, there are people that will say that we don't have enough democracy, that there is still too much institutional power. But what we have is drastically different than what the founders imagined. If the founders were around today, they would say we need to adjust back towards a consensus of reasonable men. The final thing in which the United States has changed has been the composition of the country itself and how it looked. When the United States was formed, they asked, Benjamin Franklin and they asked Thomas Jefferson, how long would it take the United States to expand all the way to the Pacific? And their consensus was 500 years. If the United States even ever expanded past the Mississippi River, and even if it even settled all of the lands that were between the Adirondack Mountains and the Mississippi River, which was never, ever, ever established. The United States, when it was founded, was not designed to be a conglomeration of 100 nations. It was not designed to be this vast, pluralistic, kind of almost free fire zone where anyone can do anything that they want. And it's vastly powerful because it has so many different people from all over the world, sharing and inputting their ideas. Now, I actually think that's a extreme strength of the United States. And I'll do another video on how the extreme diversity and scale of the United States is why the United States has been so successful. But that's not what the founders wanted. The founders essentially imagined a purified version of the English political system and of England. So what I mean by that is they imagined a country that was predominantly inhabited by white Anglo-Saxon Christians, right? That used slave labor, that used immigrant labor potentially, but that did not incorporate people from France or Sweden or Italy or Spain or Portugal, let alone far-flung places like Lebanon or Palestine or Iraq or Southeast Asia or China, right? The sense was, we're going to reinvent what the British did and where the British failed. We're going to remove the king, we're going to remove the Tory aristocrats, and we're going to establish either one of two things. The Jeffersonian view, the early Democrat-Republican view, was we're going to establish essentially a rural agricultural paradise of informed citizens that are predominantly citizen farmers. The United States economy was based on farm products, small towns and medium-sized towns. The Federalist idea was, what we're going to do is we're going to have a farming economy, but we're going to develop a moderately sized industrial and mercantile economy centered in the Northeast, in Virginia and South Carolina, and that we're going to keep the country relatively small, and it's going to be a trading infrastructure, and it's going to be basically a modernized version of the Renaissance Italian republics. So Venice, Genoa, Florence, where there's a lot of freedoms, there's a lot of technology, there's a high standard of living, but there's not a lot of people, and there's not a lot of territory, and there's no empire. The idea that America would have an empire is a very modern, new concept. Advances today, United States is a polyglot country. It's a mixture of 100 ethnicities, scores of languages, different ways of doing things. And again, I would say this mix was strong, but that's not at all what the United States was supposed to be. The borders were not supposed to be what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to end at the Mississippi River. The founders never envisioned that we'd have Louisiana or the American West, which was viewed as a great desert. So on those three things, the United States is drastically different. And you know what? That's okay, because things change and nations change over time. But if anyone is talking about the United States doesn't look like or should look like how it was back in revolutionary times, they need to examine the facts a little better, because the realities of today and the realities of the 1770s and 1780s, at least from a leadership perspective, are drastically different, especially in these three areas. Thank you, and have a good day.